I initially anticipated that we might have more time for this, but the talks have been really interesting, and we've allowed them to like run as long as they need to. And so we are, yeah, as I say, operating within a sort of small time frame here. So I'm going to try my best to be succinct. Speaking as now the lead editor of Becoming Press, and I wanted to just quickly make a reference to this discussion of psychosis, because one of the things that I like about working with psychoanalysts like Max, for example, or Lucas Ferrazu-Nazif, and working with people that are dealing with somehow similar topics and similar subject matter, like the other two, Christian and Ivan, with me today, is that, you know, sometimes I think that these psychoanalysts can be a kind of, they can be the psychoanalysts of Becoming Press. Because for a number of years, I was operating under the assumption that our editorial line was self-explanatory, that maybe it would be summarized in terms of what topics are we talking about. Maybe it's materialism, maybe it's feminism, maybe it's these kinds of topics. But over the years, I've understood that it's not as obvious as it may seem to us, speaking from inside the project. So one of the things, especially about Max's work, for example, that it's really enriching to us as editors and at Becoming Press, is that we understood through his language and through the language of neurosis and psychosis, that maybe the best way to summarize what we are doing at Becoming Press is establishing some kind of position of psychosis, or establishing a psychotic position, as we feel that we have come from or are speaking from, let's say, the outside, either in between institutions or outside of institutions, or we represent a kind of editorial line where people who work in institutions say the things that they cannot say in their institutions. So for that reason, we are kind of personally interested in exploring the topic of psychosis. And that was a sort of theme that comes up strongly in the first two talks today. In terms of the overall editorial proposition of today's talks, the one that was most relevant to the underwriting of today's conference was probably the third one with Ivan. And I would highly encourage you to come again tomorrow if you're interested in these kinds of topics, because I think that there's going to be a chance for a lot more elaboration on cyberspace media theory more directly. I'm going to start today by talking and posing a question about psychosis. Is there multiple camps here? Is there a difference in the position that is being taken by a Christian, for example, and is there a difference with that and what is being said by Max? Because on the one hand, you have somebody who's talking about sort of desire as computational, and then you have the whole discourse from Max about neurosis and psychosis. So is neurotic subjectivity something that we evolved as a part of the negentropic computation of desire? So maybe the opening question is, can you have, Max, a society of psychotics? Because you speak about psychosis as if it's people that are either like feeling excluded from society in some form. So there's a kind of interesting contradiction there that we could explore about, can a society be made up of psychotic subjectivities in that sense? Or is there something about society itself that is inherently producing neurotic subjectivities?
Yes, these are very excellent and difficult questions. Stability is really important for psychosis, because that has been like my proposition at the start, that accelerationism solved the problem of psychosis and psychoanalysis, because finally we have a blueprint for how this stability can be achieved, and this has been thought of most concretely within accelerationist thought. And we have this tradition that is kind of hard to capture, but for example, we have concepts like spontaneous order. So it's order that emerges without like any like transcendent authority or without any planning or things like that. So we have examples of how this can be achieved, and there's a whole tradition of thinkers that are operating within this kind of paradigm. But usually, because we are so used to relating through this limit or like accepting a loss beforehand, we don't even experience this possibility, or it's hard on a collective level to reach that point where this kind of relation is possible. So this is maybe the hardest thing, because like it's not that neurosis is necessarily based simply on a limit. Like neurosis produces stability. That's why it can give a lot of things to a lot of people. That's why it's so successful at forcing people to participate through the neurotic way. And of course, in the psychotic alternative, there are greater difficulty for stabilization. The interaction is more intense. So there's like the probability that something will go wrong is greater, like in the example of cogs, let's say, that are like a collective that tries a different approach, but usually like spectacularly fails, and again becomes a warning sign. So this is the difficulty of approaching these kind of questions. But for me, there's also a computational element in psychosis for sure. I also, like Christian, try to think through active inference and this kind of predictive processing frameworks for thinking about, because they help one see this general dilemma of why like there's this distinction between neurosis and psychosis in the first place, and how like basically you could think of like any kind of system that is forced with this question. It's not necessarily even about like the human or like human subject. It's perhaps even more general, and there are these two pathways from which we can take some interesting examples and think through. But I have some more, I don't want to promote myself, but I kind of solved this a bit. And but yeah, if you want, you can find.
I think that neurosis and psychosis are the same roots in desire for stability, is a loss of stability. It's just two different reactions that depends by the subject. I tried to do this relation between desire for stability and neurotic or psychotic. You can have both of them in a single subject, consequently or simultaneous, for example. And this is the type of subject that I've tried to narrate in a narrative way. I do this not theoretical, but in a text that I wrote for Venice last year for another conference. If I can try to read a little part, because there is I am not I am bad with English. I lost my superpowers that was the text before. I will try to start from Act 3. I want to read something in the middle, and you can try to link with my previous presentation. Act 3 is conversation with acceleration and cynicism. Before I start, Prometheus, as I said before, is metaphorically all of us, okay, in the book. So it is the subject itself. The rope of which life hangs is a theater of oscillating encounters. Acceleration. Prometheus, you are still young, but you have a little time. Remember that. Life is like that. The older you get, the more time expands. But when you are young, time flies and does not return. So you have to run at the same speed. Do you see how they run around you? Do you see society running, how it runs? You have to work until you bleed, and you have to help out you withdraw becoming. Retrograde Prometheus. I see it, and I feel like I never running fast enough. There are people who don't need to stop. They can follow their passions without hindrance, without the contingency of money to earn a living. How can you accelerate when you have to stop in the repetitive acts of an alienating job? You tell me to accelerate, but who are you telling acceleration? Prometheus. If you need to stop, that's your problem. My argument is universal, like chaos and search for stability. You're turning it into a vulgar social issue. Capitalism should have taught you that by now. There's no need to stop so low. If you need to stop, you'll just have to run even faster. It's all up to you. and you alone. I think that, for example, that shift from desire for stability to the part excessive with technological and that part, the statistical desire, that with technology, datification of everything, psychotics and neurotics, both of them, because the subject is obligated to run away and run with a society at an inhuman temporality. So this temporality that is inhuman and it is capitalist bring the subject to take one of two parts, that it's neurotical or psychotical. It depends from the subject, but I think that is a very social and political issue, and I think that in this way I can link my theory, my thinking with the one of
I can speak again from the perspective of being the editor of Becoming Press, that like when I'm speaking about the idea of psychosis or taking a psychotic position as a sort of editorial guideline, there are things that come up, and I should mention that we are hopefully planning to work with Max in the future. So especially between Max and Christian and exocapitalism, some perspective came up and actually was discussed in Venice last year. So it's kind of fresh in my mind that the big statement in Ex-Capitalism, that is one of the books that we published by Marek Polix and Roberto Alonso Trillo. One of the big statements in there can be aptly summarized in a direct quote that the problem is us. And I know that this responds to a kind of position within critical theory that we are often sort of beguiled with the accusation of black boxing the enemy. So we are often kind of like externalizing the problem and sort of redirecting attention away from ourselves. So in that sense, what I want to say is that one recurring theme that comes up in the Coming Press titles and in the future titles that we hope to publish is something that we might see as a kind of classic psychotic position, that the psychotic is telling to the neurotic, you know, the problems that you're facing is not actually me, or it's not actually the outside of yourself. The problem is kind of coming from within. And this is certainly something that I find Christian's work in Retrograde Prometheus frames in a very interesting way, because the beginning of this book is about evolutionary processes. So there's a sort of temptation to assume, and maybe it's the neurotic position that allows us to make this assumption, that did we evolve, and this came up in my first question sort of subtextually, that did we evolve neurosis as a way of producing societies? Now, we've already kind of addressed this a little bit in the last question, but I happen to remember a kind of quote from, or a passage that Max said last year that highly relates to this problem of what we may call molecular fascism, which is the idea that within each and every one of us who is objecting to fascist ways of organizing and fascist politics, there is a grain of it within us all that is preserving things. So I think I'm now interested to sort of turn the question from like, we have this split between, you could argue that we have neurotic stability and a desire for neurotic stability, and then we have a desire for psychotic stability as well, which is something that maybe we didn't explore. And I think, would you agree that this is a kind of interesting way to reiterate this problem, or reiterate this claim that there is a lot of internal work we need to do as progressive people, as politically active people, let's say, in terms of like identifying within us this possibility to walk either the psychotic pathway or the neurotic pathway. Like, I suppose what I'm really interested in exploring is like, what would a psychotic stability look like, perhaps? Like, maybe we can elaborate a little bit on what a psychotic mode of stability would look like.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this problem, it's because both in neurosis and psychosis, there's never this full inscription. There's always like a residual of inscription, let's say object A. But in neurosis, what's not inscribed is internally managed, whereas in psychosis, it's perceived as something coming from the outside. And this has great implications for stability, because in psychosis, stability is gained by bringing the outside in or letting the outside in, which is kind of the different path, or the path that seems like contradictory or simply wrong. This is why like this accelerationism connection is quite important, because accelerationism is basically like gaining stability by intensification. And this whole procedure is like you gain stability by finding out what's on the other side, like how you are being determined, and each determination is another insight into this determination, but also stabilization. So basically, like through this like gap in inscription, there's this alternative pathway that is available in psychosis and that is veiled in neurosis, because in neurosis it's always perceived as being internal. And we see that like on a general level, like this questioning, what does the other want, what is lacking in me? It's always like this internal projection of finding things in the other, whereas in psychosis it's different. It's like experienced more enigmatically, what is trying to form a connection with me, what is not inscribed, and so forth. So from this I made this distinction between neurosis and psychosis as a distinction between sex and writing, because sex is basically like this internal management, whereas writing is external, like what is not inscribed. And we have this like clearly, like for example Joyce like being the very important figure for Lacan. This is the general direction that I'm thinking.
Maybe I want to add just one thing that is about psychosis, that is the external, linked with what I said before in the presentation. In a sort of way, we are all obliged to be and to act in a psychotic way, because the fact that is our reality a simulation? Yes, between we go through numbers and through techno-capitalism. So to reach stability, we have this contradiction that we have to accelerate and intensify all our activities and effort in everyday life, in each field we deal with it. And we start also to suffering, but also enjoy. And when we start to enjoy, we unconsciously accept and marry this sort of practices. And I think that you recognize that is very maybe toxic just when you go outside of you, and try to see the things in third person. Because when you are enjoying in first person this psychotic activity, doesn't matter, because you enjoy it. You have a little satisfaction, a little dopaminic rewarding, and so you enjoy. So you can understand that the toxic part of this psychotic intensification just when you go out of you and see you in third person and say, oh, what the fuck.
I mean, that makes me want to ask the question from this perspective of like, is there a relationship in between narcissism and neurosis? Because there's a sense of me now wondering whether this kind of pleasure that you gain from imagining yourself from the outside all the time, in terms of assimilating to cultural norms and this kind of stuff, do you think there is a kind of relationship between neurosis and narcissism, which is another kind of very Lacanian problem that he's dealing with, for example?
I think that there is this relationship. I mean, recently I read what Ali Reza Taheri, this Iranian psychoanalysis, has to say on it, and because self-preservation, as we established, is inherently neurotic. I mean, it's general in the way Christian describes it, but like this necessity of self-preservation is inherently neurotic, because neurotics are like the other is integrated in neurosis, whereas in psychosis it's not. So when the other gets integrated, you cannot escape it. That's why, like, if you receive damage, you will cry. But in psychosis, if you receive damage, you don't cry. Because you are not connected and not forced into this interaction, into experiencing this kind of response. And because on a general level, like, we sometimes forget, but it's not so self-evident that, like, we should brush our teeth every night or things like that. Like, you need to have this internal desire for not only self-preservation, but for retaining the image of yourself. And in psychosis, this image is much more unstable. The thing is that usually psychotics are the ones that are accused of narcissism, but this is misguided, because narcissism, or rather megalomania, that comes with psychosis is precisely because the symbolic buffer is less established, and therefore this jouissance, this invasion from let's say what's not inscribed, is experienced so much intensely, so the subject like feels called in to the greater extent, or experiences this interaction more intensely, and that's why they like in pathological choices, they feel like they're actually chosen, or like it leads to some delusional systematization. But on a more general basis, that's a distinction. Hopefully I made it clear.
I agree, but I think also that sometimes it depends from the subject, because maybe there could be also a narcissist implicit, or potentially narcissist repressed, but just because we have this no computational subjectivity, we have inside the excessive part of this desire for stability that is always excess, and in this excess go also through the exosomatization, so with all the technological process that could bring us to act in different ways, in many ways that are in line with techno-capitalism, that ways of acceleration and intensification, that is also intensification of self-representation and all things in each field of life.
I want to direct my question more to Ivan, and I want to also invite Christian and Max to respond to Ivan's talk in a way. What happened before Ivan's talk was all about psychosis, neurosis, and these kinds of topics that we're talking about now. I couldn't help but think during Ivan's talk that there was a sense that we might be able to understand what they are saying or what they're presenting through the same language of psychosis and neurosis. So particularly, like when you were talking, for example, about the fun has been lost or something has changed, it really made me think, are you suggesting that there is something inherent to the digital structures of the internet that produce something like neurotic subjectivity? Because I also see that maybe the connection between the three talks today is that you're also sort of searching for something like a psychotic internet that you saw in, let's say, Web 1 or Web 1.5. Do you feel like, for example, that these words, psychosis and neurosis, have a role in how you might think through through the ideas that you're talking today about the way that digital structures produce or affect subjectivity, for example?
Yeah, yes and no, in the sense of like, yes, of course, it is possible to like draw the same from line, I guess, even when it comes to thinking, not just in terms of that I guess social and also psychological kind of makeup of both a neurotic subject and a psychotic one, but also you can, I guess, make the same case that platforms also can kind of fall within, if we're like limiting ourselves to this, then like within these two categories. For instance, there's many more. Obviously, it's It's a spectrum, hate to use that word, but it's very much applicable here. What I would like to say is that I didn't necessarily, like the genesis of all of this didn't come out of that same register. Maybe I over exemplified as to, you know, what the fun aspect is, because fun as a word and as a, just like when you think about the concept of fun, it's very vague, it's very subjective, it's very psychotic. What this essentially means is that the conclusions we arrive at are more likely than not be just as vague as the premises we are setting. I am definitely searching for something. I have no idea what this is necessarily. I just know that certain types of, and even though there's obviously pitfalls to this that we've seen even within the offline political world, for instance, what I'm searching for is an alternative. And we until that sort of alternative gets here, we can't really say for certain whether or not it's going to be good.
So if I now invite like a follow-up maybe from Max, for example, because one thing that I was feeling or thinking during Ivan's last talk is maybe we could think about perhaps the neuroticization of the internet, playing into what you were talking about in terms of the way that it has evolved and the way that the structures have developed. So maybe the question relating back everything to cyberspace and to the internet and that distinction, what effect has the internet had in terms of subjectivity for you? And is the internet or cyberspace something of a useful tool for getting out of some of these neurotic states of subjectivity, or is there something inherent to the current structure of the internet that is just constantly reproducing something like a neurotic subjectivity?
Fully sympathize with what Eva was proposing in the talk. I think that the idea of emancipation is basically like synonymous with the internet, and it's really unfortunate that it become lost to such an extent. So then like this distinction between the internet and the cyberspace being this place that has been lost and so forth, and all of this frontier and things like that come with it. Because internet has so successfully penetrated our lives, it basically became a new layer through which we engage with the world. And what it led to is that because this exit or breakthrough, the cyberspace wasn't successful, it wasn't successful in producing like actual material results, or like it didn't have the impact that at some point it seems like it would have, then just the existing authorities or the existing structures just like basically uploaded themselves online and became the grid through which the engagement is possible. This legacy continuity that is established is so hard to break through, because this is what neurosis does. Like it forces a participation in a certain way, and then like each new iteration is just like closing in on the loop. So for example, if you play basketball, you are, let's say, an all-star, and then after your career, you either become a coach or a podcaster or a host. Or a news anchor, or what's it called. The existing like structure just re-uploads itself perpetually. And if you want to say anything about the NBA, if you want to be a part of the narrative, like you have to respect this kind of hierarchy, even though I can look for, I know, advanced statistics, have my beliefs that are potentially more well-founded than like legendary NBA players, but it doesn't matter because the grid is what's important. If you are outside the grid, like speech is simply non-existence, it's censored. And with this full transition to the digital, like basically attention has become like the new commodity. And that's why like people simply want to see what they already want. Previously on the internet, we were like shocked by encountering, let's say, weirdos, opinions you didn't know about, and so on. Now we are just like engaging in politics, whose side is better, or or did this person that is already a millionaire like successfully destroy the other one? So this whole alternative economy has been so fundamentally lost that it's basically impossible to establish this different connection that was previously there, precisely because there was no censorship, no like full appreciation of what the internet is. Because like if we playfully use this psychosis neurosis talk, like of course neurotic wouldn't know what the internet is about, of course they wouldn't have a feel for the virtual capacity, but because it's generated billions of dollars, it leads to upheavals in elections and so forth, and then because this happens like the 10th time, people come to terms, okay, we have to buy Twitter. So you see.
Thank you. I try to do another type of answer related to all of this stuff. And I think that, okay, with the internet, social platforms, and so on, we have, for me, a full spectrum of possibilities from neurosis to psychosis. Okay, you have all of these in this spectrum. You can stay in the middle and have some neutral way of approach to internet, social network, and so on. But I think that about emancipation, for example, is very subjective. If I think about emancipation from my subjective thinking about emancipation, I think that it could be elitarian, because it's not a common way. For me, emancipation through, I don't know, a practice as a TikTok influencer is not emancipation, but for another one could be. So it's very subjective if we pose the critic about the position of every subject, but it could be also elitarian if we try to build a single way of consider emancipation and try to build an object for all the subjects.
We are about to run out of time now, and I was supposed to now turn just to the audience and actually inquire, did anybody have any questions that they would like to ask the panel?
My question originally came after Christian's presentation, but I think it can be addressed by all of you. I wonder if you believe in the inevitability of the technological progress, if it's kind of like a preordained movement through human culture, human society, and whether or not capitalism and technology can be separated from one another, and there couldn't be technological development independent of the capitalist logics.
From a class struggle perspective, I think that we can't have the possibility of develop technology from bottom, because in this time technology are at a high level that request a lot of resources. At this level of progress, I think that technological progress is closely linked with capitalism. So what we can do, I'm very cynical about it, but for example, I don't say in the presentation this part that is in the book when I say that, okay, Prometheus, metaphorically, all of us, is not a biohacker. I love biohacking, I mean contemporary arts, I love it. But as a common person, for example, even me that I talk about technology, I'm a shit programmer. I can't touch numbers. So we don't have the possibility from a class struggle perspective to engage and reprogram at a high level new technologies that can be separated from that capitalist technology. So I think that we can have to try to use the tools that we have. I participated time ago at an hackathon. There was a lot of theories and theorists slash programmers that presented a lot of tools to avoid high-tech platform or applications. And it's very interesting because it's a practice that you can do from bottom. There's a little micro communities that can afford all this, but the whole humanity, it could be useful try to use the tools that we have, that we can afford, and try to do something different. Another concept that I'm conceptualizing right now of my next research, it's about atemporal technologies. That is about sort of thinking about the fact that will be no right-level technology, in the sense, okay, I try to produce a new technology and this automatically, because it's new, it's better than an oldest technology. So if you can try to put all the tools and technologies at the same level, this could have a political shift, because you don't have anymore a linear notion of progress that brings us to extinction. Think about the last Palantir manifesto. They say that the new deterrence will be not the nuclear bomb nuclear programs, but AI and softwares. So you have this Promethean notion of linear progress. When more high technologies you can build, more you have access to control and so on. So this is the main point also regarding, I don't know, AI and so on. The point is never about humans or social uses. It's about control, it's about deterrence and so on. So I think that we have to create little island that we could expand progressively.